Okay, we're on.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know where people are from. Bia, should I start officially then, the panel? Or should we wait a little longer for Sally, or should we officially start?
I think we can start and then we wait for her because I wrote her. Now we just wait for an email.
Okay, so again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this, what I think is going to be a very interesting panel focused on women and music, and that's the name of our panel today. I'm Beatriz Polivanov from Universidade Federal Fluminense in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And we're still waiting to check if the second presenter, which is Sally Ann, if she's going to be able to join us. We hope so. We truly hope so. But meanwhile, we're going to start the panel because we're a little bit late, a little bit. So I want to inform everyone that this panel is going to be started by Tarynne Swarts. She's from the University of Wits. Her paper is named Renegotiating Gendered Subjectivities and Deconstructing Patriarchy in the Music Industry, Narratives from Musicians in the Global South and Global North. Then we would have Sally Ann's Grass presentation. She's from the University of Westminster. Her paper is called Talking About a Revolution, Social Media Music Activism Among Non-Binary, Non-Males, and Women of Color Musicians. And then we will have the third presenter, who is Rafael Moreira from Universidade Federal Fluminense. And his paper is entitled Bahian Mothers Sing the Counter-Hegemonic Struggle, Matriarchy in Samba Schools. We should have about 10 to 15 minutes for each presentation, and then we would open for discussion with the public and with the audience. And I would just like to briefly say a few words about Tarynne Swarts. So Tarynne, she's also known by her stage name, which is Pachamama, and she's an Afro jazz musician from South Africa. She's currently a Baden-Württemberg's visiting doctoral scholarship recipient at the University of Tübingen in Germany, and she's a PhD candidate at the University of Wits in South Africa. Her research specialization is on internationalization and policy in Africa higher educational institutions, and she holds a master's degree in education from Leuven University in Belgium and a Bachelor of Music degree specializing in classical piano from Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. She is also the CEO and founder of Imibala Music Festival in South Africa, and she has been a music educator for 10 years, and she's a proud artivist, women's rights activist in the arts field. So we are very, very pleased to have you with us today, Tarynne. I will present the other presenters, the other panelists as we go on, as we proceed. So now the floor is yours and the microphone is all yours. So please welcome we welcome you, Tarynne, and we hope we have a very nice discussion. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to present. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Okay, can everyone see my screen? I just want to move it slightly to present because there's so many. Everything is opened. Okay, so can everybody see my screen and can everyone hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, that's wonderful. Okay, So the topic that I'll be discussing is renegotiating gendered subjectivities, and I'll be looking at women in music, and I'll be contextualizing it more specifically, women of color musicians in South Africa. So before we kind of get started, we just need to just break down what exactly is subjectivity. So subjectivity is centered in certain power structures. There are gender roles and gender expectations which can inform the subject. It can either be a feminine or masculine subject, and that gender is not a linear thing. It is fluid and it can branch out in different directions. A subject has agency and can resist power structures. There are certain things that society can define you as, and subjectivity kind of speaks to a broader societal construct. Example, agencies, ways you can resist or reclaim or denounce or appropriate certain things. And yeah, so I thought it would just be a good starting point to talk about what is subjectivity, and now to contextualize it within my research. So I'm from South Africa, and I grew up towards the end of the apartheid era in South Africa. And for those of you who don't know, apartheid was a policy of racial segregation and discrimination. It was a type of hierarchical structure which positioned whites as the privileged, coloreds like in the middle, and blacks in the lower tier. And so many of you might be wondering, what is the term colored? So the term colored in South Africa is a social group that constitutes a history of mixed heritage, distinctive culture, and communal subjectivity. I mentioned colored because I belong to that specific racial categorization of mixed descent. And in South Africa, it's a kind of an envial or liminal space to occupy in society, kind of being in the middle, not quite belonging to the politically or numerically dominant African blacks as per the racial categorizations of apartheid, or the economically more powerful whites. So this was a racial designation that was given to me by birth from apartheid structure, which came from colonialism. So I would also see myself as a subject of the colonial subject. Okay, so I'm going to now, sorry, can you, my screen is, my next slide doesn't want to move. Okay, sorry about that. So now, where do I locate my subjectivity? So in terms of intersectionality, I'm marginalized basically on both sides as a woman of color or colored woman, and due to my racial positioning in South Africa in terms of identity politics. So I've had to negotiate this type of intersectionality of power structures between gender and race. And as a classically trained pianist, I've kind of occupied these white hegemonic spaces as a woman of color. And as Afro jazz musician Pachamama, I've occupied more masculine gendered spaces, where as a woman, you're kind of marginalized, or they are, yeah, by the dominant masculine gender. So I also do take on a bit of a privileged positioning myself, having been a classically trained pianist, which is classical musician itself, and society in South Africa is kind of more for the privileged white hegemonic structures. So for me, it's just kind of be a constant type of renegotiating between trying to appropriate, to try and just fit in, being in the middle, and also trying to resist and break certain boxes that have marginalized me, and trying to just try and create my own space in forms of resisting. Like I think as I got older, I took on more of a resistance subjectivity. So going beyond, so I thought I was looking for a bit of inspiration. I was reading different articles about women in music around the world. And then I just remembered, as the director of the Mibala Music Festival, in 2020, we hosted a woman in music panel, and there were women of color musicians there. And I just thought, let me just listen to this panel again and see what the women were talking about. Because I have my own experience, lived experience, but there are also experiences of others. So I just thought, let me just look at that. For any of you who's interested, the link is on YouTube. It's Imibala Music Festival Day 7. And I can share the link if Beatriz and them would share it later. So from that panel, I realized, I was part of the panel as well. From that panel, I saw that there were 4 main themes that appeared from these discussions. And these 4 themes was that 1, women as bridge builders, 2, agency, 3, positionality, and 4, becoming. So I took a little bit of the narratives and I put it on the screen for you guys. So I'm just going to quickly read it if that's okay. So this was a narrative from one of the women musicians. So I do not know, this is not only in music, men just have a problem. You know, this 50-50 equality, I don't think they are fine with it, or maybe not say all of them, but the majority are not accepting. It has been tough being a woman in music, but in the long run, when you're showing them that you're not disrespecting them, you're also just trying to put your own opinions out there and you also want to be heard. They must give you a chance to talk, give you a chance to express yourself and your ideas. I mean, you can't be a musician and have all these ideas and then you must be chilled back and be silenced and not share these ideas with your band members. It's not right. So this is quite an interesting topic that despite women owning this margin, or women of color owning this marginalized position in society, having to operate in these gendered spaces, they still continue to be the ones that are problem solving, finding solutions, trying to educate men and show men that gender roles can be fluid, it can change, that women can also occupy these spaces. And they are creating a space for themselves and also trying to kind of bridge that gender divide. They are active participants in bringing change and taking ownership of the place and space that they command. So the second topic, second theme that popped up was agency. We need to be sensitive to women out there, as there are a lot of women that are objectified. Problems like people having more access to you because you're on stage, and it welcomes men and women and gives the impression that you want to be sexualized or objectified. And that is not always the case. Sometimes women use their sexuality as a mechanism to take back their power. We have to be sensitive to the struggles of women, as it can be a difficult act for someone to be on stage owning their sexuality, but they use it as a way to take back their power after being violated or perhaps being sexually abused. So this one speaks a lot to agency. Women reclaiming and owning their sexuality, or using their sexuality to take back their power of perhaps of being abused. And in a patriarchal society like South Africa, it also speaks to how women are objectified when they're expressing their sexuality, which it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to resist when there are so many patriarchal structures at play. The third theme that popped up was positionality. If you are a woman vocalist, you have to meet certain standards, and I don't want them to do that because I'm a woman, but I'm not a woman who would necessarily go on stage and be in a dress. So I wish society could stop asking, why is she not wearing a dress? Why are they not singing a type of way? Society also just messes around with our heads. If they could just listen to one's talent, that is enough, and not box a person. You could also find, let's say, lesbian women like tomboys that want to be on stage with their baggy jeans, doing whatever they like. They're not going to be accepted like the people that would be on stage with their elegant long dresses. I wish society could be open to everybody and just accept that. So this topic speaks about positionality, different positionings in power structures, when you're conforming to the hegemonic ideals of Western beauty standards. For example, let's say Beyonce, or light-skinned, or certain like Western ideals, it would kind of put you in a more advantageous positioning than someone, let's say like Missy Elliott or Yolandi from the Antwoord, for example. And there are different contestations. Some are resisting, some are appropriating, some are reclaiming, but all of them might be vying for some contestation from different power structures of gender subjectivity, kind of vying for benefits in the matrix of power struggle, and deliberately resist stereotypes or appropriate certain things to kind of put you in a better positioning. So it's just like everybody has their like positioning, and like everyone has the choice or the agency to choose which positioning they would like to choose, whether it is maybe more conformist, appropriating, resisting, reclaiming, or denouncing. And the final theme, it was a theme on becoming. So this was a narrative from one of the women of color musicians. I'm still trying to unpack the layers of what it is to be a woman of color in music, what that is and what it means to me, and what I want to portray to the world in the most sincere and honest way. I believe that you have to take a moment to discover yourself and self-reflect, as we are all constantly evolving all the time. And once you get a grip on this, it will steer you in a better direction when it comes to being a woman in the music industry. So like the concept of gender that is fluid, the process of becoming is also fluid. Also, like the term gender, what it would mean to, you know, to be the meaning of what a woman would be in terms of the definition of gender in the 1920s. A definition of a woman in the 1920s might be different from the kind of definition of what it is to be a woman in 2022, or even in the future, what the meaning of being a woman would be in 2050, for example. So this process of becoming is a state that we never really arrive at, but we are always in a kind of process of evolving. So just in conclusion, women, they are taking their agency and control and taking ownership of their positionality, and taking ownership of themselves as musicians. They're trying to build bridges, trying to teach, trying to educate. Maybe that can also speak to a bit of a, like taking on a feminist, reclaiming femininity of nurturing, caring, caretaking, trying to, you know, bridge divides. And always like women, we're trying to navigate the spaces of, you know, all these different intersectionalities that we might have, and trying in that process to become like maybe the most honest, authentic, sincere version of who we are. And yeah, so thank you very much everyone for listening. And yeah, if anyone would like to contact me, that's my email address. I'd also just like to say thank you to my colleague from Wits, Mr. Bailings, Christopher Bailings, who also helped me a lot to brainstorm where exactly like I fit within my own positionality as a woman of color musician in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Tarynne. It's so weird to clap hands like this, but thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Now we go in, and your timing as well was perfect. About 13 minutes was excellent. Now I see that Sally Ann was able to join. Sally, yes, she's there. Great. Oh, that's amazing. So I'm going to briefly introduce Sally, and then we can move to her presentation. Is that okay, Sally?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, great. So, and then in the end, then we have Rafael's presentation, and then in the end, we're going to open for comments, questions, whatever you want to say. Feel free, please use the chat or use your voices. Feel free to join us in the discussion afterwards. So just a few words about Sally Ann. So she's going to present a paper named Talking About a Revolution, Social Media Music Activism Among Non-Binary, Non-Males, and Women of Color Musicians. And she is a music industry practitioner, an author, and an academic as well. She is the co-author of Can Music Make You Sick? Measuring the Price of Musical Ambition. She has been working in the music industry for nearly 3 decades as an artist, manager, record label director, and international business affairs consultant. And in her current role at the University of Westminster, she is the program director of the MA Music Business Management. In 2016, she founded Let's Change the Record, which is a project that focuses on bridging the gender divide in music production. Sally is a music industry expert and is a regular speaker on the International Music Festival and Conference circuit. And she's also the mother of 4. So please, I welcome you, Sally. Thank you for joining us. I'm happy that you were able to join us. And please feel free to make your presentation now. I don't know if you're going to share your screen with us.
Right. No, I'm not. And firstly, I would like, I hope everyone can hear me. But I'd like to sincerely apologize because I'm in a different time zone and in a very kind of Anglo-American centric way. I was just like, oh, 2:30 UK time. And I didn't notice that you're actually in a different time zone. So I'm really sorry. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. You've just kind of said some of the things I was going to say anyway. And it was interesting to catch the end of Tarynne's talk, because I think there's a lot of things that she was saying that in some ways fold into some of the work that I've been doing. So I'm not presenting, I'm not doing a presentation. I'm going to talk a bit about my work and the development of my work and the way in which the work that I've been doing to some extent, I would say over my whole life, or since I was a conscious teenager and politically active as a teenager, a member of the school union, students' union, when I was a teenager in the UK, I've always been very involved in political activism. That's something that I think children of the 70s maybe were in some ways, certainly here in London. And I'm very, very conscious that I'm speaking specifically about my experiences and my teaching experiences, and my professional experiences are often global, but they are nevertheless always part of the global north, even though America, and I work a lot in Paris and have worked a lot in Paris, and still they are very specific to that area. And I think that's very important. So I'm going to do a little bit of reading off here, but I'm going to come backwards and forwards. So please forgive me. So thank you so much for inviting me to talk about revolution, which is one of my favorite subjects. I think we love to talk about revolution, and it's again what I would call one of those glittery terms. It's one of what I call a golden term. People are like, oh, revolution. We have a technological revolution, a social media revolution, we have musical revolutions. But beyond that, when we start to look at them, they're not really revolutions at all, or they are changes and they are shifts, but they're not actually revolutions. So I'm very, very conscious of the way in which music as a practice and the music sphere co-opts words and uses marketing as the kind of neoliberal practices of marketization are so embedded in every direction and in every place in the music landscape. So it becomes very, very difficult to untangle them and to question them. And particularly when we talk about music in its positive sense. Music is a wonderful thing. Music brings us joy. Music brings us pleasure. One of the things about my research that started with asking that question, can music make you sick? When I first asked that question, everyone said, what are you talking about? Why are you saying something so negative? And of course, music doesn't make you sick. And I said, what are you talking about? Actually, if we look at historical understandings of musical practices across millennia, we will see that music practices were highly controlled. Anthropology shows us how highly controlled they were. Who could make music? Who could be on the stage? Who could sing in this way? Who can sing high? Who can sing low? So again, we have this new kind of ideological place in which music is seen as this ultimately universalizing, bringing us all together, something that coheres us in a oneness of this wonderful set of particular kinds of values. that we can really identify as digital capitalism and neoliberal practices, right? So once we're in that space, we have to then be highly critical of our highly aware and sensitive to everything that is going on in that space. So once I started my research, I came to academia from industry, not even understanding my own position in some ways. The idea of entering academia and being with students really appealed to me. I was working in Paris and London. I had 4 teenage children. I was constantly traveling. I was like, oh, wow, academia, that sounds great. What a great place. I'll go there. Great, fun. I actually was completely naive in that I felt like I was leaving the hyper competition of the music industry to enter this new place where we'd be making things and having discussions and everything was going to be really great. So it took me a long time to wake up even to the hierarchy of academia and to understand where popular music was being used in a way, in an ideological way, to expand academia, to expand courses in higher education at the time of the introduction of student fees here in the UK. And these are very big shifts in the UK. Suddenly we're going to bring in a lot of people into education, but we're going to charge them. This had never happened before, and it happened under new Labour government. So we talk about that in the book. So when I'm beginning to become really aware of this and becoming to think, I need to actually think about this. I need to think like, what is my place in academia? You know, the only woman. I go from a music industry where I'm so frequently the only woman in the room to a music department in a university where I'm the only woman in the room again. And I'm like, that's interesting. Half the students are female. What happens to them? Where do females go? Where do non-males go? Where do non-white, you know, if you can't grow up to be a white middle-class male, what is your future? Like I was starting to be like, really, like, what is going on in this spaces? At the same time, everybody's telling me that this space is highly inclusive. This is what we're here for. We're here to do popular music and include everybody. It was very high, super contradictory. And I could see that very much in front of me. I became very, very aware of it in a way that, having worked in the very much in the independent music sector in the early 90s, then I went into work in a major record label as running a dance music label and doing kind of hip hop and dance music and electronica, where I could see then that we were being brought into these big institutions because they were incorporating us. They were taking us in the way that capitalism absorbs and mutates in a very active and effective way. So as you're doing it, it seems pleasurable. You don't necessarily notice that this really big shift that was happening in the late 80s, 90s in the cultural space of cultural production. And then cultural production stops being called cultural production and becomes the creative industries. And all these things, like, be aware of what is being said. So once I started to look at, can music make you sick? I started to look at the ways in which music was being mobilized in terms of expansions of different forms of digital capitalism, and how does that impact inequalities in what was evidently a place of inequalities, despite the rhetoric of inclusivity, despite the rhetoric of meritocracy. It was high. So for example, I then began to look merely at my own institution. So on the master's degree in music business management, which I ran, I had more women and people of color graduating as alumni. When I looked at the master's degree in audio production that had been running 5 years previously, so it started in the 90s, it had only produced in 22 years 78 women alumni against 400 men. It was incredible, right? And so then I was like, okay, you know, that really a place where I really have to, in myself, engage with gender in terms of looking at the music industry from a theoretical position of gendered perspectives and in critical theory. I had to try, how can I bring critical theory into music business? And music business was a space that didn't want to think critically about anything. It only wants to sell more records and make more money. So if you're trying to introduce critical theory, people are looking at you like, why? Yeah, I would go to conferences, music business conferences, and start to ask these questions. People say, why you? What? And I said, well, it matters who gets to create culture. It matters who gets to own copyrights. It matters that we understand the flows of intellectual property and copyright management, because copyright management becomes copyright accumulation, and a copyright accumulation becomes market share, and that becomes globalization. Because these are how capitalism operates. Until you start to challenge it, you will not understand these flows of inequality, and you will not understand how revolutions are political acts. They're not new tablets on your iPhone, or they're not a new app, right? You're not going to download a revolution next week. That's just never going to happen, right? So it was a real moment for me, and it wasn't a moment. That's completely untrue. I think, I'm always very, I'm learning always so much from young academics now, and for people that it's like, wow, it wasn't like that for me. It was like this slow churn of, hang on a minute. How do I begin to understand what is happening in this space? How do I begin to formulate a way of teaching and of inquiry that challenges the status quo and looks at and does it takes it seriously? And in a sense, that starting Let's Change the Record was a kind of instinctive and initial moment, was understanding that when you're in a recording studio, you're in an incredibly gendered space. That's like going to the mechanics with your car. You're never going to rock up to the mechanics and find a group of women waiting to explain to you how your engine works. And we all know that. And it doesn't matter where we live. We're all kind of like, shit, that is going to happen to us, right? And it is very, very similar in a recording studio. The language of technology, knobs, how Sonic plugs in, is used to exclude you. It's used to make divisions and hierarchies. So it became just a completely practical, pragmatic moment when looking at the Occupy movement. I thought, what do you have to do first? What should we do in this university to stake our claim in this place? I know, I'm going to take a group of women students and we're going to occupy the studio, right? Anyway, so and that's how my research has progressed, from these kind of moments of some kind of what I would call some kind of activism. They're not at all revolutionary, but they do hark back to activism of the 70s. They do hark back to second wave feminism, and that was important. And it was important for me to start looking at feminist history and to talk to the young activists amongst my students, amongst my friends, the groups I'm meeting, and to try to speak to them about what these things meant. So moving very quickly on to my current study and what I've recently published. So during the lockdown, after the global events of 2020, the music industry across the world specifically had a blackout Tuesday when they took the day off. The show stopped, right? So the show stops for one day. We will reassess and learn something. And lots of people were encouraged, as equally people were angry and upset. So it was a kind of polarizing moment. But what happened after that was that it galvanized a whole explosion of social media activism, calling out, a whole known strategies that one would have been used on on social media before, but became very much illuminated in the music industry space. And so I could see online, I could see alumni from my course doing this work. I'm like, oh my God, look, they were everywhere doing work. And I thought, this is interesting. I'm going to call out to them and say, hey, what's going on? How are you feeling? No one's together. We're friends. They come in and talk on the course. We have a solid network. So I spoke to a group of women aged between 28 and 55, all of whom were active during this period to some degree or not. So because I don't want to talk forever, which would just quite happily do, I want to say firstly that what was very interesting, a kind of summary that speaks to me very much of these moments, is that for the first time since I started doing research, all of these women were prepared to call themselves feminists, which they hadn't been before. Suddenly they were all feminists. They were all very clear on being anti-racist, and they were given a momentum. They were given a feeling that they could call out, say, and they were recording and speaking of their experiences. Trans alumni, LGBTQ, people with disabilities were saying, you can't have a disability and be in the music industry. No, and even they haven't made access to major record labels for a wheelchair. You can't even get in. They haven't thought about it there, right? It's very, very interesting what it threw up very, very quickly. So it was a condensed moment of people. I kind of now really been looking at it again and thinking about what were the kind of three things that were coming about in this moment. And so one of them was very much about self-expression. So even though it was collective expression, it was also selfish expression. Each individual person had something individual to say. Even if they recognized the commonality with someone else, they were also very, very clear about the difference. And I think this was, we had a lot of talk of colorism, which is very, very kind of understood here in the UK, that people of mixed heritage, you will find in the music industry, and you'll find it's a thing that's been understood for a long time, that that women singers of mixed heritage like Sade or Mabel, there's many of them, but people, and so the idea of colorism was really misogynoir was really spoken about a lot. Several of the alumni wrote pieces about it that were published, longer pieces. It very much came to the forehead. But in that grouping, for me, there is this very specific piece that I called self-expression. It's and when they talk about it as the importance of being able to say, like, it actually has something that's not just verbal, it's about a physical emitting, so it's very linked to self-help. So they themselves saw it as promoting better health in them if they could say this. So that was an interesting thing, that it's not just, it's not just the act itself. The act is in itself like good breathing or well-being, like getting it out, getting this anger out, being able to express yourself. And again, always feeling empowered by doing that, right? At the same time, the same women would also talk about feeling exhausted. So being empowered and feeling exhausted came together, right? Which kind of means they zero each other out in some ways, right? I'm empowered, but I'm exhausted. I'm empowered, but I'm exhausted. They have a kind of flattening effect. The other thing that I think is about this idea of change, this idea about revolution, of like, what is different? Like, so they were all themselves talking about this moment in particular. This moment in 220, we could do this. this is an amazing moment. It was almost like that moment was the moment. So now in 222, the same women that I speak to, you can very much feel this idea of how do we hold on to that moment. So we had a moment that was 2 years ago now, and maybe they're going to stop talking. It was very, very interesting in terms of the difference between the race and class of the women talking. So the white women music professionals were already very conscious of that. You know, they were already saying the time will run out. Whereas the Black women who were more engaged in in a lot of this activism were very much concerned about elongating the moment, not allowing it to run out. So yeah, I've been given the time flag. Yeah, and so the last section for me was about the growth in music practices that includes talking about music, the industry of talking about music, more music conferences, more music business conferences, more education, more apps, more. So this kind of bringing women into music in itself has created a whole industry of bringing women into music. And I'll stop speaking now. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. I had to be the one to tell you about the time that
someone has to do it. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry I was the one that had to do that. Thank you so much, Sally, for your talk. We're going to have some time for discussion later, so I hope we can continue the conversation. Thank you so much once again. And now we're good, and we're going to move on to the third speaker, who is Rafael Moreira. I'm going to say that with a Portuguese accent because I'm from Brazil, so Rafael is from Brazil as well. So I say it Rafael, not Rafael, as some people would say it. I'm just going to briefly present and introduce Rafael to everyone. He holds a master's degree in communication at Fluminense Federal University in Rio de Janeiro. He graduated in social sciences from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. He works as a sociology teacher, and he also works as a composer for the Unidos de Vila Isabel Samba School. He researches the samba schools and the aspects that correspond to the ritual process of the samba and carnival environment, especially the decolonial aspects in the music and in the narratives of the plots for the parades. So I'm very happy to have you here. Rafael, please feel free to start your talk, and then we're going to have some time for discussion. But then we know that you have a health issue right now, so I know maybe it's not going to be a possibility, but thank you. Rafael, the floor is yours.
Bia Medeiros, you share my presentation?
Bia? Bia, are you there?
Yes, sorry. I responded him on the chat.
Okay.
Is there anything I could? Oh, okay.
Well, hello, I am Rafael Moreira. Rafael Moreira. I'm graduating in social science and master degree student in communication at Fluminense Federal University, Universidade Federal Fluminense, Niterói, no Brasil. The panel aims to analyze the representation of Bahian models in samba schools in Rio de Janeiro, jogo de parada of the Unidos do Viradouro Samba School in 2020. I'm oriented by Professor Felipe Trota. My research is about the samba schools and the decolonial perspectives in the parades, more specifically in the sambas. I worked making the costume of Baiana swing in 3 schools. presenting matriarchy in samba schools, Bahian models seeing the counter-hegemonic struggle. Next, please. Samba develops on the Bahia-Rio de Janeiro axis in the context of slavery in the country. It took place inside slave quarters and farms. It also occupied urban areas. In Rio de Janeiro, in a post-abolition period, samba gains strength within the ports region of the Rio de Janeiro, the city. Even with the violence against Black people in the capital, the music genre gained notoriety through the figures who played the music. Quintero Rivera explained that sounds, expressions such as samba were essential to break with the systematization of synchrony, challenge the absolute predominance of Western modernity through music, even generating visibility for the actors. In his words, it is above all about liberating ways of expressing the relationship between the synchrony and the diachronic and successive, breaking the sonority, the systematization, referring to the gravitation around the synchronicity, I'm sorry, the tonality of the Newtonian paradigm of Western modernity. Next, please. Well, the Unido de Viradouro parade can be analyzed as crucial to observe the relevance of biomodels in the samba circuit. The samba and the parade present a mutual tribute to biomodels. The ganhadeiras de Itapuã, ganhadeiras winners, but ganhadeiras de Itapuã is the best. A musical group honored and the narrative leads to a connection between the Bahian models and biomodels of samba schools, or biomodels of Bahian, biomodels of samba schools in Rio de Janeiro. It presents a continuous struggle of women who fight for valorization in popular culture and in storybooks, according to the social performance against postures imposed by patriarchal and slave colonialism. Therefore, decolonial postures in samba and through it. The parades reinforce the importance of women in maintaining the faith, as well as substance, but for freedom and for food. They are responsible for memory through music and fraternization. Next, please. The Ganhadeiras de Itapuã are a music group formed by women who date back to historical figures who conquered the manumissions of their families through work in rivers and streets of Salvador City, in Bahia. They are women responsible for maintaining the Afro-Brazilian faith in the samba de roda by singing their religion based on Yoruba practices. Women who worked on the banks of the rivers and making food to support their families and conquest the children's freedom. The musical group dates back to this woman who sang while working. They treat each authors of descendants and sing original songs passed down through generations. Next, please. In Rio de Janeiro, what can be understood in the narrative is the connection with the Bahian models of the samba schools, which go back to the historical figures of Tiaciata in slide, in Yalorixá, considered of mother of samba, who participated in the construction of the music of genre that took place in her home. These ladies lived in central and port regions of Rio de Janeiro. Many Black people living in the region known as Pequena África ou Little Africa em inglês. O Small Africa ou Little Africa. Chasiata and other women fought against the various attempts to ban musical practices in her terreiro in Rio de Janeiro. In honor, the samba schools created the Baianas Wing of Baianas, in order to perpetuate the figure of matriarchy in samba. They are responsible for maintaining fair, as well the ganhadeiras, as well for socializing in the racial courts, feijoadas, and candies, whatever. Next, please. In the images, the two representations of Baian models in the parade in 2020, which was the champion of the carnival. The Baianas wing dresses as delicacies from the Baianas, and the ganhadeiras parade in the last allegory, representantes de axé comes from Bahia, surrounded by Xangô, X, and the crown of Viradouro. In these images. Next, please. Finally, it is important to say that the parade showed the reverence that the samba school pays to this woman who give continuity to the popular culture. Before present the legacies, I see controversies that can be interpreted as a romanticization of women who were affected by slavery and the daily struggle for freedom. The need to have to work on the rivers and streets of cities cannot be seen with a meritocratic perspective. Under a counter-hegemonic struggle, the ganhadeiras continued the dynasty by inserting themselves in phonographic industry. The legacy of the ganhadeiras is maintained and passes from the oral tradition to records on digital platforms, Spotify. The Baianas wing of the samba schools continued with the Baianinhas wing, formation of new Baianas. That's also participative in feijoadas, fraternizations and rituals and the associations of samba. Finally, next, I thank everyone for the attention, the University of Tübingen for the very well-organized event. That's thanks Ufi and CAPS too. I made an appointment with a dentist. I will have to lead the meeting. If you want to see an email, it's here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafa. Thank you very much. I hope everything's going to be well in your appointment and everything goes smoothly. Thank you very much for your beautiful presentation with beautiful images from our Escolas de Samba in Rio de Janeiro and also in Bahia. Thank you. Now, we ran out of time, but we have to have time for discussion. This is the most important part, I guess, so that we can talk to each other. So I think we would have about 10 minutes. Is that okay, Bia? So until 11:15, yes. Is that okay?
It's okay, yeah. Even okay. 15 minutes, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So now we're going to open for comments, questions, anything you would like to add or point to. So please feel free to just raise your hand or your voice, or write on the chat. And I know that some people are watching us on YouTube, so you can also send comments over there. Is there anybody already ready with some with the question? Oh, Bia, okay, she wrote on the chat that Carolina Govari, thanks for your powerful presentation, Tarynne. And she's asking, what is the name of the festival again? And if you could share some information about the festival with us. So I think maybe we can start with that and then we move on to other questions. Thank you.
It's called Imibala Festival, and the hashtag is Cross Colors, Cross Cultures. We do have a YouTube page, and Imibala, actually, it means colors in isiXhosa, which is one of the native languages from South Africa. So colors, just bringing people together. And in 2020, we hosted the festival online. That's where we had these panel discussions. And you would find the Women in Music panel on day 7. If you type in Imibala Festival, but I can share it with Beatriz and them and send the link to the YouTube page if you'd like that.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Tarynne. Are there any other questions from the audience, or maybe I can jump in with some of my own, or I just don't want to intrude? Or okay, so I'm going to use my time here just a little bit. I would like to really congratulate and thank you all for your presentations. It was wonderful to see how much we have in common, actually. It says I also research gender in music. I focus on electronic music scenes here in Brazil, and also I did part of my research in Montreal in Canada. So there are so many things that we have in common when we talk about inequality in terms of gender in music, in different music scenes and in different territories. Then if I might ask a question or make a comment, I'm sorry that Rafael is not able to join us in the discussion, but I would like to address a question for Tarynne and another one for Sally, if I may. I'm going to start with Tarynne just because of the order that we have for the presentations. I really loved the idea of the 4 X's that you presented, Tarynne. For me, for my research, it's also something that is very connected to what I have been listening to women who produce music in electronic music, and also people that are non-binary gendered. And one thing that I was thinking about is how much we have in common in terms of the complaints or in terms of the problems and the challenges that women face in music. And then another thing that I was thinking about my own research is, what are the strategies? Could you point out to some of the strategies that you find in your own research and in your own career as well, in order to face such big challenges that we have in the music, in the industry of music? So could you point to some of the challenges that's not the challenges, sorry, but some of the strategies that you perceive that these women are using in order to fight those problems? So that would be my question. And for Sally, I was also very pleased to listen to your talk. And I think I have so many things in common with my research as well, because I also research social media. And I couldn't agree more with the idea of revolution. So we use revolution as a term that is like empty of meaning, I guess, nowadays. And I was reminded of Rebecca Farrugia's and also Judy Waxman's work on the idea of gender and technology, the idea that technology is gendered, so it was not made for us women, and it was made by men in order to also to exclude us from using it as a tool for self-expression and everything. And I also really like the axis that you brought up about self-expression, the exhaustion. I find the same things in my own research. It's very much connected. I'm really shocked by that. And this idea of having the self-called feminist nowadays, and it was not like that a few years ago, I guess, from my own perspective. It's changing, it's switching. But then what I would like to ask is, we can see certain potentiality in social media. So that's what you were saying. So we're able to self-express, just to express ourselves in ways that we were not able in the past. But at the same time, we know that these are also media that are made by men in a very restrict industry of the Silicon Valley and etc. So could you also point to, we like the opposite of the question for Tarynne, could you point to the not so interesting or not so powerful aspects of the social media in this case? So that would be my question. So I know that we're using them for self-expression that has a lot of value, but could we also point to some problematic issues such as algorithms, racism, for example, in these algorithms, and the concentration of these platforms in the hands of a few white men? Could you point to those questions as well, those matters? Thank you very much. I hope I was clear. If I was not, please just let me know.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, for that question. I'm also very interested in what Sally mentioned about empowerment and exhaustion. I think that definitely is such an interesting point that we don't even think about, that we're kind of always trying to fight certain systems, trying to break stereotypes, break these gender roles, break into these industries. And it can be a bit exhausting to say the least. But that brings me to one of the strategies. I think that sometimes we have to, women, we go through so many challenges. Sometimes you're exoticized, hypersexualized, objectified. Men are gatekeeping you out of certain spaces, like Sally mentioned, the recording studio, which is such a gendered space. I've been in those spaces where actually I as the producer was silenced, and I was in Spain. I was recording my album Pachamama there, but I was in the south of Spain, and I realized it was such a tough environment to be in, because the patriarchal culture is very fuerte, very strong in Spain. And I was coming in there as a woman of color, as an immigrant, as a woman, all these intersectionalities. It kind of was working against me, and as an instrumentalist. So, but I had to ask the question as well, why am I still there? That's a big question. Why? I've been in the industry, I've been playing classical piano since I was 10 years old, as an artist Pachamama for 10 years now. So I've been in these spaces, but I think it's much more tougher when you are an artist, because now you have to many times lead a band because you couldn't find enough female musicians, for example. You're in these gendered spaces, you are in recording studios, you kind of have to rely sometimes on knowing the right gatekeepers that can exclude you. And but why are we there? It's a good question, because I feel like we have to kind of analyze that women are there for many reasons. Maybe they want to prove a point, they're trying to break these stereotypes, they're trying to fight for their ownership, taking spaces. They've got talent, they've got ideas, we've got so many things that we want to share. So we kind of are putting up with this. Maybe we're fighting for the next generation of female women to come along and not have to struggle with all the challenges that we've had to fight. I mean, we have come a long way, but we still have we have come a long way from Billie Holiday's time, but that was a different time, a different oppression. But we're still in this Me Too era, and women are still coming out and saying we are still going through gender-based violence and stuff like that. But what I found from that panel for Imibala Festival is that many of the women had such a positive outlook, many strategies. Some of the things they would say, if you're in a class and there's only male musicians, you know what? Go and approach them, work with them, learn with them. Sometimes they also said men might not even be aware that this is such a gendered space and that there are no women on the lineup. But that's not all the experiences, but there was that positivity of building that bridges. And then I would say some women that have been gate-kept out of, there's this article I read about female DJs in South Africa. Some of them were kind of gate-kept out of the industry, especially in production, because DJing relies a lot on also producing and putting your tracks together. And then they ended up creating their own festival, women only. And this created an even more of a beautiful kind of setting of inclusivity, which they said that even the audiences were different. There were more LGBTQI people that felt safer in these types of audiences. It's like that one of the narratives that I spoke about is that educating the men. Sometimes the men aren't even aware that maybe that these spaces are so gendered. But overall, and also female mentorship, like, you know, leaning on other women for support, and kind of not trying to, yes, we are fighting this big patriarchal structure, but the positive thing is that they're saying that they're seeing a narrative shifting, that there are men that want to learn. I mean, I grew up with very supportive male mentors. My dad, late dad, he was a jazz guitarist. He was very supportive. A lot of like other band musicians, and I found even a mentor in Spain, like a male jazz pianist, Pitaka. So I can't say, I don't want to generalize that all men are like this. We are fighting a broader construct, but we're breaking it down bits and pieces just by being there, just by playing an instrument. You could be a double bass player. You're already kind of changing that narrative. You're changing that gender role stereotype that this is such a big instrument and it's a masculine defined instrument, a woman shouldn't play it. Or maybe your hair is a different type of way from what a classical piano should, but you're breaking it. And I think that we're slowly starting to get to a place where there's like a shifting of the narrative. We still have a long way to go, but I think women are coming with a feminist, like reclaiming their femininity. They're not trying to be masculine in these spaces. They're not trying to necessarily try and fit in any. They're trying to use the power of their femininity to kind of build bridges. So I think we're in the right direction. And it's funny that we're the marginalized ones, but we're the ones trying to build the bridges. So I think that is just shows ownership and agency and problem solving.
Thank you so much, Tarynne. Now we move on to Sally. You're muted.
Sorry, I'm doing that. Yeah, I was so engrossed in that answer. I mean, these are very, very complex issues. I think that's one of the things. What are the strategies? You know, what are the strategies? That's one thing. There are lots of different strategies at play at all times, and the women-led social activism and groups and equalizing groups, equality groups that I'm researching are all doing these things. They're all doing these things, but what is it that we're measuring against? What's the achieved goal? What are we looking for? You know, so I think that when we talk about strategizing change, and if we take a bigger look, I think that this idea of the individualizing of strategies, what's the individual strategy that you can do? I think these new forms of feminism, these new feminist strategies of empowering yourself, doing yoga, doing breathing, turning the machines off, turning the machines on, all of these things have their uses. Of course they have their uses. You know, there's nothing wrong with doing yoga or Pilates or breathing or going for a walk, or, you know, all of these things have uses. Do they change patriarchal structures? Does involving men help? You know, like, why are we concerned about men? I think this is really interesting. I have 3 sons. Obviously, I'm not anti-male at all, you know, but it's an interesting thing that I think we talk about racial politics, we talk about gender politics, or like, if we're in a queer space, we don't have to be worried about what hetero cis men think. Like, we don't have to bring them in. I don't think that's, to me, they've got enough space. They don't need to come in our space right now, you know. So I think I'm not that, I think those are different, they're different sensibilities. But in terms of, so you asking me a question about social media activism or gender technologies. I mean, the internet is an utterly male space. And I think the internet from a larger, if we look at the work of Tatiana Terenova, for example, she very clearly identifies that the internet was constructed by males, completely male space. In order to turn it into a marketplace, it needed to bring women in. In order to sell things, you need women to buy them, right? Women are, a pregnant mother, a pregnant woman is the biggest consumer you can have in capitalism. Pregnant women buy more things than anyone else at any given time, right? That's true. Like, it's funny, but it's also true, right? So I think when we look at large scale data about change and continuities, what I'm concerned about here is not is what's happening in terms of who gets to make culture, who's included in cultural production, how the economics of cultural production works out across, what we have at the moment in terms of music economics, in terms of the impact of streaming, is that for new musicians, it is much harder. It is much harder. So when we look at globally where the money's going, it's not going to new musicians. And I think this is something that young musicians and emerging musicians and women, there is no shortage of women musicians, or women want to be musicians. Or you can see that classical music schools, popular music schools, drama music schools, anywhere women turn up, young girls turn up, right? Where they then appear in the music industry is less than 20% globally all over the world, and usually less. That data is not changing and has not changed. In the last 10 years, it hasn't changed. It hasn't improved in any way. So I think we need to ask questions about what's actually going on, what industries are benefit. Music is a carrot. It's a carrot. It's a carrot for technology industries. It's a carrot for electronic, you can produce an album at home. You don't need to go to Spain anymore. Download Logic, have a DAW, just so you can have all that audio equipment here. The degendering, the work of degendering the space of music technology is happening. Women are making, I think there would be an interesting historic study if we look at how women produce the romantic novel. Women produce the romantic novel. It's female literature, right? We do not have an equivalent female music. In literature, we have romantic literature that is completely and utterly dominated by women, both in terms of who writes it and in terms of who reads it. We have no musical equivalent. People need to think about that.
That's a great point. I was thinking about pop culture, but still it's not. Yeah, it's not. It's a great question.
Popular culture does not produce lots. You may have women singing, but if you look at popular culture, is not produced by women, but the romantic novel was, and those were written by women, and they created a market that was bought by women, just same as women's magazines, right? So we have to understand that. We have to look at that and from all different purposes in order to encourage governments to invest in women, right? The popular music market in the Anglo-American sphere was a very commercial market, wasn't funded by the public purse. But nowadays, it's much more funded by the public purse. And so once that happens, you see things like key change. So they are complicated. It is very complex. And I do think that at the moment we're in a growth of a communications industry. And one of the things we're communicating about is music, which is completely different from making it and releasing it and earning money from it. Completely different, right? So I think that these things need to be said and they need to be uncovered. We're in a data production industry. We're producing data, we're buying technology, and we're paying energy bills.
I couldn't agree more. That's it. Perfect. Well put. Very well put. I'm so sorry we have to leave the room now, but I would just like to point to many comments that we not so many, but many for the people who were there, many comments that were very positive. So people were thanking you all for your presentations. And I thank you all for being here. Thank you all for presenting your wonderful papers and wonderful presentations. Thank you very much. I hope you all have a beautiful day or evening. I don't know where you are. So thank you once again. We have to close the panel. I hope we see each other.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry I was late.
And thank you, Sally, and thank you, Rafael. It was so interesting. It was so wonderful to share the panel with you. And